the museum, and there was that Killer 1100, the same one that I wrote.
Good deal. I'm going to get started.
Got 4 full pages for you. You want them now or what?
Yeah, I'll just lay them up here. Yeah. Good evening. Take care of this room and all the refreshments and everything. They're a great partner of the FAA in Reno. Very open, good communication with them. And there's Frank back there doing his technical job now, above and beyond what his job is at the airport to help me out tonight. I'm Larry Cheek. I'm the safety program manager out of Reno for operations. And I've been in the job about 6 years now, probably the best job in the FAA because you get to try to help people not have accidents instead of investigating accidents, which we've had a few of them we're going to talk about tonight, hopefully with the intent of sharing what caused them so that they don't get repeated. With me tonight, we've got about a 3-hour presentation. We'll have a break. I want you to check your cell phones, silence them if you can, please. You know the exits, the same doors we came in and down the hall. Restrooms are farther down the hall, past the entrance on your left and right. When we have a break or you need to head that way. I want to invite our 2 other presenters tonight, Russ Smith and Rick McBurnett. And I'd like for you 2 guys to come up here. And this is Rick McBurnett, a retired airline, been flying light airplanes. This is Russ Smith, big in the Civil Air Patrol, as you'll see. I mean, he actually runs the whole thing, I think, nationwide, I believe. Anyway, both of these guys are very active flight instructors, and they work with me year after year, communicate with me regularly about safety and what we can do and tweak our programs and everything. So just stand by there for a minute. I want to recognize them with an award from the safety team, Rick and Russ. Yeah. And basically, without grabbing it and reading it, it says, thank you very much for your continued support of the FAA safety team. You go above and beyond anybody else that I've had the opportunity to work with, and always support me in this program. So thank you guys very much. You can set them on that table to keep from damaging if you want, and appreciate you being here tonight to talk also. We got a good program for you. So we're gonna go through the accident review for the Reno area. I'm going to give you a little statistics about nationwide numbers that occurred during 2019. And the reason I'm going to talk about 2019 is because I get these numbers off of what we call the NAW report. The NAW report only publishes information that they get substantiated by the NTSB. Of course, when the NTSB looks at accidents, they take sometimes up to a year and a half or more to get their final conclusions and send their final reports out. And so that's what some of these numbers at the very beginning are going to be based on. So Frank, next. Also tonight, we're broadcasting on YouTube channel. Let me just ask you, how many here are here tonight because you saw the invite during an email, or how many did not see it in an email, came because of somebody shared with you tonight? So that's good. I like to know that those emails are getting out and everybody's seeing what's available. Tonight we're going to broadcast on YouTube, and Frank will probably know at the end how many people are observing. During this broadcast, during the whole presentation tonight, will be asking 3 questions during the presentation. All the YouTube watchers have to watch for the answers. To get Wings credit, they have to send me an email and give me those answers. So it's a challenge for them, and I hope they enjoy it. Next question. This is mainly going to be, like I said, a recap of the NOAA report. Next. So here's the 2019 non-commercial fixed-wing accident. And something here that I wanted to show you that surprised me a little bit is 20% of those accidents were mechanical. That seems to be higher than what it used to be in the past. It used to be about 85 to 90% were all pilot-induced accidents, but those numbers reflect something different. Next. Here's the breakdown of the different certificates that incurred accidents and whether they're fatal or whatever. And you can see commercial, private pilot, 441. That's not unusual, just due to lack of experience. Again, I see something on this slide here that shocked me again. Drop all the way down to the bottom. CFI, flight instructors on board, 250, almost as much as just regular commercial. Well, why is that? That should not be that high. And I think that we need to make a big push for flight instructors to take a look at risk management a little closer. And also keep in mind that they have a lot of responsibility when they're training new students. Now, it could have been a student flying, a private pilot advancing, an instrument pilot, or whatever. And a lot of times, you know, when flight instructors are on board, they're in a curriculum with the student or the pilot that's under training. And they don't have the luxury sometimes to choose or to delay flights as easy because it's so difficult to get back to them, with them, to get their flight out. Next. Here's the breakdown of the different types of mission that the flight was on when the accidents occurred. Instructional, look at that number. Yeah, personal, again, that personal flight is so high because usually lack of experience and people just not knowing their limits. And interesting, I think I'll show you this a little bit later, but most accidents in general aviation are wind-related cause. And when I say wind-related, to me that falls back on the pilot's ability to make the right decision at the right time and to not extend themselves beyond their physical limits of controlling that aircraft, and or possibly not practicing go-arounds enough, because you'll see that most accidents occur during the landing phase as well. And if pilots, I think, were able to recognize that something's going awry during their approach to land with a crosswind or gusty winds, and they had the confidence and the expertise and the memory, muscle memory for a go-around, they could get out of that situation before that accident happened. So keep that in mind on all your flights that you make and the decisions when you got these crazy winds that we experience around here. Next slide. Mechanical accidents. Boy, the color in dark black there are fatals. The other numbers are just total accidents. Power plant failure. You know, and look, you can even come over here to fuel system. Now, fuel system could be something where you had some contamination or something like that. But power plant failure, many of those caused because of fuel exhaustion. Not necessarily that the piston blows or, you know, your valves or something like that freeze. It's a lot of those are avoidable, but it's still an awful high number for power plant failure. Next. And these are the different types of accidents during the different phases of flight. Landing, of course, coming back to the ground, squirrely winds, a little bit different than taking off, flying away from the earth. The takeoff is still pretty high. fuel management, 8, and you'll see some of those that we've had locally here in a minute. Next slide, please. Here's type of landing accidents. Loss of control. Always the number one, loss of control. Now, why is that? Again, coming down to a landing, squirrely winds, crosswinds beyond what you're used to, making a decision to continue to land with a crosswind when maybe you could make a decision to go to another runway or another airport, or you could delay landing. And you get good indication. You need to know what the winds are at that airport. So when you're coming in, you're 15 miles out, you listen to AWOS, you can't count on that alone when you come into that pattern. You need to look for visual indicators, the windsocks. They can be different at both ends of the runway. You need to know if you're coming in for a downwind. You'll see an accident we had because of that. Airspeed stall. That's not that uncommon either. And that's usually fatals. Next slide. Okay, these are the takeoff and climb accidents, stalled or settled. And notice the black, the fatal part of that number being higher because you're away from the ground. The gravity's pulling you back down a lot quicker, and the impact and the crashworthiness of the aircraft's not in a favorable position to slide it on like a landing would be. Am I in your way? Okay. Next slide. Descent and approach accidents, again, stalls and spins. You're going to see some of those that we've experienced in our area. Unfortunately, one of the saddest ones that we've had this past year. Next slide, right. Weather related. There's the number one killer, VFR into IMC. It's a lot, it's more than twice anything, almost as much as all the rest of them combined. Now those flights, that VFR into IMC, you got to back up a little bit and you got to start thinking about the decisions that the pilot's making. The decision to even take off, maybe not checking and knowing really what the true weather is. I can tell you that several pilots do not check NOTAMs when they're flying. That's pretty common, and that's a mistake can be easily fixed. Going into bad weather, sometimes at night it's almost always going to be fatal if you're inadvertent IMC, mainly because you're going to lose control and you're going to spiral down into a high G crash. Next. Now, what do you see interesting about this slide? Anything real interesting there that makes you wonder? What's that? Well, why is that person walking to that? Instead of running away from it. They want to get a sand bath or sand blast, I guess. I put that on there because this is not unusual out here in our area, but it was a little bit unusual to see somebody walking toward it, I thought. Next slide. So, yeah, a cloud burst, and you can bet you've got some powerful winds coming off of the anvil of that thing. I mean, when you see these big airliners experience these and the wind goes from a 10-knot headwind to a 25-knot tailwind in about a 3 or 4 second period, it's going to be go around time. Power up, pitch up. Hope that planes can get out of it. The next one. Now, I was back at Minden Airport here a couple of months ago at a safety meeting, and one of the flight instructors had talked about a microburst that he almost took off and flew toward. He hesitated, and he got his camera out, and he took this picture. And it shows you that we can have that here also, even though we don't get a lot of moisture. Over there on the bottom left, yeah. Okay, next. So we're going to go into the Reno area accidents alone, 19 again this year. We pretty much run anywhere that number, 16 to 22, back and forth year to year. You know, after COVID and everybody was set down for a long time, we had a lot of desire to get out and fly. So I think that the flight hours in our area shot way up whenever we were able to go back into the plane. And that may add more risk to the overall situation of accidents. But again, 11 of them loss of control and 8 of them due to winds. Those are decision-making avoidable accidents. 2 lost power. You know, remember the mechanical failures. 3 stall. Now that's surprising. 2 fuel management, totally avoidable, and 1 controlled crash. And you'll hear more details of all these. Okay, next. Here's the the ratings of the pilots involved, the PIC of the accident. 3 CFIs. Remember that number early on? All those CFIs? 4 commercial, 6 private. Not unusual to have that number up. 3 student, 1 sport, and 2 ATP. Now that doesn't mean those ATPs were pilot errors, but that's the rating that they held at when the accident occurred. Okay, next slide. All right, next click. We're going to go through each accident now briefly and with a more specific. That student pilot mismanaged the speed brake and coming in to land, and he actually pulled. He needed to get to the runway. He was going to be a little short. Instead of letting the brake down, he pulled it all the way up. Just the opposite of what he needed to do. Keep in mind, a student now, so muscle memory wasn't there for him to react without actually thinking about it. Plus, when you're all of a sudden seeing that you're maybe a little short, you want to act quick, and he just happened to do it the wrong way. Next. Yeah, no, this one here is totally unavoidable too. Private pilot flying his own airplane, coming back into mission from the south, and you know, what do you do when you're coming in and you're going to descend? Reach over and pull the carb heat out. What did he do? Pulled the throttle out. Engine quit. Tried to start it again, unsuccessful, and crashed it off airport. Next. That's an experimental amateur built is what that EXP-AB stands for. This happened out in the Elko area. A pilot was going to take his experimental amateur built, landed off airport on a ridgeway, and when he touched down, again, lost control. Probably had never touched down there before, maybe had never even walked on that area, but made a decision. Why? Because he just wanted to try. Was it a smart decision? Who knows? It caused an accident, so I don't know if it was smart. Next. Again, student pilot here just lost control on a go-around at Alturas. If you haven't practiced those with instructors, you know, you can really get yourself in trouble with when you all of a sudden push that throttle in, the P factor, don't have your rudders properly set. So it's something that you need to practice with your instructor quite a bit and you may need to do it when it's time for you to avoid that accident. Next. Again, up there at Truckee, you got some squirrely winds up there, and no matter what runway you're on, you may not have the wind actually defined in your mind when you come into land. That was this situation here. Just came down, started density altitude high, came out of the sky pretty quick, bounced it, then lost control. Next. Again, shifting winds here on this one. CFI was in the aircraft, attempted to take the controls and maybe a little bit too late in making that call, and maybe didn't have enough flying speed to continue and came down and exited the runway. Next. Oh, this one's sort of interesting. We don't have too many balloon accidents. This one here was again due to winds, so they're coming into land. It started coming down pretty rapidly, bounced the basket. It rolled to its side, and the pilot fell out, leaving the passengers in. And so the pilot, smart enough, grabbed the crown line, and the balloon lifted her off the ground up to 10 feet, where she fell back down to the ground. Small injuries, but nothing serious. Now, the passengers smartly grabbed that crowd line and dumped that air and came back down. They had a few injuries, but nothing serious. But boy, were they lucky, huh? All right, next. Another situation where CFI lost control, landing downwind, and ran off the aircraft, hit the dirt, flipped it. Cessna 182. Again, you know, you can hear the AWAS. You get back to the airport, winds might be different. Now, I think that might have been the situation here. You know, it's just, you can land downwind, but, you know, it's going to be a little trickier, that's for sure. And this instant here, there was a person being given some instruction coming in to make the landing and touchdown, but then the flight instructor tried to take the controls, and in the process of doing that, the aircraft left the runway. They didn't get the right inputs in at the right time. Next. Yeah, that's just a situation where the engine quit, and I don't know the mechanical failure of that reason right now. When we have a situation like this, that plane and the engine all go over to Sacramento to plane parts, where they'll, in TSB, a call for a tear down to see what was going on in the engine, and it takes forever to get it back. Anyway, next. Now, this was just a commercial pilot that made a decision to put it down to Lake Winnemucca, and it was a little bit softer than what he expected. He nosed it over. In another decision, didn't really know what the surface was going to be. We had that helping out at Black Rock Desert when Burning Man goes on quite a bit. Not during the event because the airports and everything's all up and running, but people fly out there and land just in the area and flip. Next. Now this one's a sad situation. There's a 24-year-old flight instructor given instruction in a Cirrus aircraft up in Truckee. Didn't have a lot of time in the Cirrus. Had been flying 172s. The Cirrus requires a faster airspeed than the 172. So his numbers were not used to flying that fast. And so he took off, and there was initially some report that he might have had some engine issue. But in a Cirrus, you know, that's such a technologically advanced aircraft that everything's documented on it. RPMs, pressures, oil, everything, speeds, everything. You can extract that out of the computer. And then he made a right turn off of the runway. Now, I've been told that when you're flying up there, and we have air traffic control up in Truckee full time now, that they will encourage you to make right traffic for this particular runway. And that's okay in some instances, but when you make right traffic, it puts you over a tree line as compared to left traffic, which keeps you in the clean. And so he made this right turnout and started to go downwind. And witnesses said that the airplane just fell over on its right. And then at that time, the flight instructor made a conscious decision to pull the chute on this Cirrus. Only problem was he was only 350 feet. And that's not high enough for that chute to do its job. And it says even in the manual, 400 feet absolute minimum, 600 feet is desired before you ever think about pulling that chute. When you pull that chute on a Cirrus, even when you have altitude, as soon as that chute deploys, the nose of the airplane drops straight down, and then as it's falling, it levels out and can drift on down. Many people have walked away from crashes with those chutes, but when he pulled the chute, you could bet that nose was going to take him straight into the ground, and that's what happened. Unfortunately, he perished. His passenger, a student, survived. And the data from the computers on board showed not one problem with the engine at all. He just got too slow and stalled it. And that was turning downwind. So you got to know your numbers and your speeds. And who knows, we don't really know who was on the controls at the time. And if the flight instructor may have waited too long to try to come on board to salvage it with speed. Yes, sir. 2-0. I don't remember that number, but it was pretty high. It was a summertime. Yeah. And, you know, just a few years ago, we had another crash up there, very similar. The guy took off, his engine quit. And both of these guys, when that engine quit, where we could see the altitude starting to come down on the track, they track all the flights up there. If they would have banked to the left, they could have gone right into the meadow, and salvage probably walked away from it. A few years ago, the same thing. The guy put his gear down when his engine quit, drag. And then he tried to turn around, and he went down right and he flew right into the bank of a berm, and killed them both on board that one. Okay, next. Yeah, now this guy had his own Kit Fox, and he was a California Fish and Game or some agency for the and a water resource conservation manager or something. So they would fly around and check the reservoirs, see what their different things are, and he'd land up next to them. Well, he had another person on board and tried to take off and take grass. The prop was even hitting the grass. And first run, he didn't make it. He stopped, turned around, tried again. He got airborne, but stalled and crashed right into the berm and killed himself. No, I don't know. Yeah. Next, please. Again, student pilot flying a trike in Carson City. The crosswind was the bandit. And a trike's hard enough to fly, especially for a student. You know, I tried it one time. It was fun, but not again. and so that's really the cause of that, you know, inexperience and crosswind. Next. Now here's one totally unavoidable. Landed in Chester, taxied off the runway, went through his after landing checklist, shut his fuel off, pulled back out on the runway to make a takeoff, climbed up, engine quit. He finally realized he'd shut his fuel off, but it wouldn't start again when he turned it back on. Yeah, checklist. The number one thing that'll save you. Next. Now this is interesting. This guy is out there at Wells. His wife's with him, and it's hot. And an AA-5 has that canopy that the sun beats down in, you know. So they get on board the aircraft, and they taxi down, and he gets down there, does this run up, and all of a sudden he says, "Damn, we're sitting here with a downwind takeoff. We better taxi back." And wife says, "Oh no, we're okay." And so he attempted that downwind takeoff because they were getting cooked, and of course he lost it. And nobody seriously injured, but decisions. Next. Again, student pilot again. From what I understand, he came down on the touch and go, give it the power, lost control, went off the runway, did not flip over, and he powered it back up on the runway and taxied it to parking. But there was some damage to the nose and the firewall, and that threw it into the accident category. Next. Now this is the biggie. This is the one where this Challenger or CL600 coming in from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, to Truckee with some real estate people on board, very wealthy real estate people. 4 people, older couple, very young couple, the pilot, co-pilot, and 2 dogs, all perished. Now, this was back in the day when we still had smoke in our area, and Truckee had smoke as well. And so when they came in and did an instrument approach, came down, reported they had the field in sight, were cleared for a downwind to make a circle to land. Now, we don't know if they lost the airport for a minute or not. They never reported that on the recorder to the air traffic people. But what we do know is that when he turned base and he tried to turn final, he overshot final, which is easy to do up there, and it's caused some other jet accidents up there as well. And so he overshot base, banked it a little bit more, and then stalled it. And then went in, then crashed it. The plane fell out of the sky, right into the ground, missing a school bus by just a very small amount of distance. And we know that the throttles were full forward. He'd firewalled the throttles to try to get out, but he probably waited too long. Now, that was a sad situation. That crew, we don't know how much experience they had together, but we do know that the co-pilot was leaving the company to become an FAA inspector in 2 weeks. It was a sad situation, really sad up there. Next. Now this was our last accident, I believe, for the summer. And this one was totally avoidable. I know these guys. And they took off in the 172 out of Reno, southbound. The grandpa, the son, and the grandson. And I believe the son was possibly on the controls, but the grandpa was the pilot in command because he held the proper certificates. I don't think the son had a medical. Anyway, they're climbing. They're on their way to Yerington, and they're climbing out toward the mountain ridge to the east. And they continue to proceed in that direction. But this aircraft now is not able to outclimb the terrain. Now, they had opportunities to do a 180 or to turn around. Now, when you're approaching any kind of mountainous ridge line, you should approach it at a 45 so that you got that easy turnout. They were 90 degrees to it, and they kept flying and flying, and finally, the more experienced grandfather took the controls and knew that they were about to stall. And so he dumped the nose and took it right down into the rising terrain. And then they all got out, and he picked up his cell phone and called Tower and said, "Hey, we just crashed, but we're all okay." And thank God for that. Boy, that could have been disastrous with father, son, and grandson, grandpa, father, and son on board. Last time I heard, the aircraft's still up there, but I don't know if they got it out. It wouldn't have been an easy extraction, that's for sure. I think that's the last accident. Let's check it out here. Is it? No, one more. Yeah, lost power in a Beach 35. I don't know much more than what that slide says right now. That's 9/11, other than the date. You know, I don't know what the cause of that was, and so that will be an engine tear down and try to figure that out. All right, next. Okay, here's one. This is the last. I keep taking the last. We had 19 altogether. This one, a non-certificated certificated pilot. I guess we can call him a pilot. He was the one controlling the aircraft, or not controlling it. Landed an experimental amateur build. Actually, he stole the aircraft. He stole it off of the Bishop ramp, took off, came back, and crashed it. The FBI's looking for him. Yeah. That's next one, please. So, a few things here just want to point out. You know, pilot capabilities, you can take a look at the workload management during different phases of flight. The green line here versus capabilities, approach and landing, close to the capabilities. When you get that wind involved, it even closes down more. And that's always something you better keep in mind coming back in here in the Reno, Minden area because of the crazy winds and how they can immediately be blowing 35 miles an hour across the runway in a matter of a few seconds even. I just wanted to point that out. Next slide. And here's your risk. You know, cruise is not that high. Coming down, landing 25%, climb out 23%. So cruising is 15%. You know, anytime you're cruising, you're going somewhere. You should have your route planned. You should know as you're flying along what your options are for emergency landing or nearest airport. If you do lose an engine, you may be high enough that you can actually go. There's a lot of little airports and landing areas around here. But if you know where that is, and some of these the technological advancements that you could buy just external to your aircraft that you have inside will monitor the wind for you, and it'll show you where you can glide with your speed and altitude, and if there's an airport in it. You just have to be able to read it and follow it. But again, when you get down there to the surface, you know, the winds, you never know what they're going to be like for sure. The other thing I want to mention is that somehow my mind went back to an accident that occurred about 5 years ago. Guy built a nice aircraft out here in Fallon. He took off, was flying to Idaho, climbed up, engine quit. He thought about trying to make it to Winnemucca or Lovelock, but he wasn't sure he could get there, so he decided to go ahead and put it down just in a field. And he was successful. He put it down. I don't know how much damage he did to the aircraft, but he didn't hurt himself at all. And I tell you this because of all the things that he was thinking. He had a functioning radio, and he never told anybody that he was going down. You know, and so luckily his cell phone did work when he got out on the ground. But look if he could have been injured. You got to know when that engine quits and you got an emergency landing, you need to rattle off what you're going to say on the radio and how you're going to fly that plane. And you need to go through all that before every flight. Run that through your mind where it's automatic every time if it happens. And then simulate sometime and just see how good you are at recalling that stuff. Next slide. And now in this next version here, Mr. Russ Smith is going to take over as he's a retired pharmacist and he knows this stuff. And so we're going to talk about aeromedical considerations. And I don't want to steal any thunder, but we use some videos off of Emory Riddle, and you'll probably never see anything so good. Russ? How are we doing? Everybody feeling okay here? We need a break, or we'll go right into this, and we'll break after his, okay?
Okay. Sure. So you can hear me okay. Hey, we're going to have a little fun. We're going to take you back, for some of you, 50 years. We're going back to high school biology class. Some of you are only going back 1 or 2 years. But I look at some of the younger guys out here. These are great videos. And we saw these, and it's like, we want to try and look at this and think about ourselves as aging pilots. We all have one thing in common in here. The sand is going through the hourglass, right? Nobody's getting any younger. No two of us have the same experience. No two of us have the same number of hours or flown the same types of airplanes. So we want to think about that as you watch these videos. We're going to break them into little chunks. We're going to start off. Frank, go ahead. We're going to kick that off. And I think you'll enjoy these. Then we can stop after each one and ask a question if you got any. And then we'll move right on. We did this because some of this stuff didn't apply to us. So hypoxia and hyperventilation is the first video, and that's something we live with here at this altitude.
Humans
and flying in the
normally
mountains.
dwell.
So Hopefully
while at
we
the
got
bottom
good
of the atmosphere,
audio.
where sea level air pressure is about 14.7 pounds per square inch, or about 30 inches of mercury, as measured by a barometer. The air we breathe is roughly 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen, and 1% other gases. As we breathe, air is brought into the lungs, and the oxygen we need is forced through the thin-walled sacs of the alveoli, where it then passes into the bloodstream. The pressure of the atmosphere is what pushes the air through the walls of the alveoli. The blood transports the oxygen to the cells where it is burned to fuel our body, and the byproduct, carbon dioxide, is then carried back to the lungs and is exhaled. The buildup of CO2 in the lungs is what triggers the breathing reflex. Nitrogen is also carried throughout the body by the bloodstream, some of it going into suspension in the cells. Nitrogen is an inert gas, and under normal pressures has no effect on the body. Hypoxia is a condition in which the body, or part of the body, is
4 types
deprived of adequate
hypoxia.
oxygen.
Don't worry about the
Perhaps the
technical
most
name.
common type of
They all do the same
hypoxia
thing.
experienced by pilots is hypoxic hypoxia, where there is not enough oxygen available to the brain. Just like a mountain climber, a pilot will encounter reduced air pressure as they climb to the higher altitudes. Although the ratio of oxygen is the same, the pressure of the atmosphere is reduced, resulting in less air being pushed into the lungs. Pilots compensate for this in one of two ways, either by pressurizing the air inside the cockpit and cabin of the airplane, or by breathing 100% oxygen through a mask. High-performance aircraft, such as airliners and corporate jets, use their engines to pump compressed air into the cockpit and cabin, keeping the relative pressure high enough to force air into the lungs. Pilots of unpressurized aircraft breathe supplemental oxygen from oxygen tanks. However, breathing 100% oxygen from a mask typically only works up to about 40,000 feet. Most smaller aircraft don't carry oxygen systems or have pressurized cockpits, so pilots of these aircraft need to be aware of the reduced oxygen with an increase in altitude. In fact, the FAA has imposed limits on how high a pilot can go without being on supplemental oxygen. With the decrease in oxygen in your bloodstream, there is a decrease in your vision and mental functioning. That is also why they recommend going on oxygen at 10,000 feet in the daytime, but only 5,000 feet at night, as your eyes need extra oxygen to function at night. Stagnant hypoxia occurs when there is a decrease in blood flow to the cells in your body. Simply put, your body cannot circulate your blood. This is first evident in your vision and then your brain function. Fighter pilots and aerobatic pilots experience stagnant hypoxia when the G-forces created by quick changes of acceleration prevent the blood from flowing normally. This interrupts the supply of oxygen to the eyes and brain, which results in a blackout. Special straining and breathing techniques can be used to reduce the effect of stagnant hypoxia. Hypemic hypoxia occurs when the blood is unable to accept and transport oxygen. For pilots, this may occur if carbon monoxide is entering the cockpit, perhaps from a leaking cabin heater. Smokers also suffer hypemic hypoxia whenever they inhale smoke. The hemoglobin in your blood absorbs carbon monoxide 200 times more rapidly than oxygen. When carbon monoxide binds with your red blood cells, they have no room to carry the oxygen your body needs. Carbon monoxide is a byproduct of all internal combustion engines and combustion heaters and is odorless and colorless. Many aircraft have carbon monoxide detectors to alert flight crews if carbon monoxide enters the cockpit. Histotoxic hypoxia occurs when there is enough oxygen in the blood, but the body's cells are unable to make use of it. This form of hypoxia can occur when the body has been poisoned by drugs or alcohol. It should be noted that drinking just 1 ounce of alcohol has the same effect as climbing 2,000 feet in terms of oxygen impairment. The lack of oxygen creates visual and mental impairment. Symptoms are lightheadedness, a feeling of euphoria, dizziness, blue fingernails and lips, also known as cyanosis, tingling in the extremities, and headache. The symptoms experienced differ by person, and each may not be experienced by everyone. Prolonged hypoxia will result in unconsciousness, and at high altitudes, it may result in an untimely death. If you notice any of these symptoms, it is important to increase your intake of oxygen. Check your cabin pressurization or oxygen system. If it is malfunctioning, you need to descend to a lower altitude quickly. If you suspect carbon monoxide poisoning, turn off any cabin heaters, open all fresh air sources, and land as soon as possible. When under stress or experiencing anxiety, some people will breathe too rapidly. This way of breathing results in hyperventilation, where too much carbon dioxide is being exhaled and creates a lack of CO2 in the blood. The resulting symptoms of dizziness, weakness, fainting, and tingling sensations of the lips, hands, and feet are very similar to the symptoms of hypoxia. What's more, the symptoms can cause anxiety, which in turn stimulates more hyperventilation and exacerbates the symptoms further. It is important to diagnose hyperventilation correctly and not confuse it with hypoxia and vice versa. The symptoms of hypoxia can also cause a pilot anxiety, which could trigger hyperventilation, aggravating that situation. To a new pilot, some maneuvers such as stalls may be stressful, just as a real emergency would be stressful to an experienced pilot. Treatment for hyperventilation is accomplished by deliberately slowing your breathing down to a normal rate. If necessary, you can breathe into a paper bag, which allows you to rebreathe your exhaled CO2, helping your body regain proper CO2 balance more quickly. It is possible to suffer from both hypoxia and hyperventilation at the same time. If you're not sure which one you have, it's always safer to put on an oxygen mask and take deeper, slower, controlled breath.
Okay, that was applicable to us. What altitude? What's the answer? 5,000, right? We're at 4,700 feet here. How many of you used supplemental oxygen at night and seen a difference? Okay, a couple. We ran an exercise a few years ago, and we did it with the Highway Patrol when they still had aircraft, and we had half the aircraft went out with oxygen, half of them did. And we had targets, and they went from here to Silver Springs, over to Urington, back over to Smith Valley, and back to Minden. It was fun to keep track, but the people that had oxygen, and we went to a state of 10,000 or below. The people, all the crews that had oxygen, didn't matter which group they were from, saw all the targets. The people that weren't on oxygen saw about half. So it was an amazing statistic to see when we put that together. So 5,000 feet MSL. The other thing is the insidious thing about carbon monoxide. Don't forget that. It can happen. And when it happens, it gets into the blood. My background, a little background in fire rescue, and it was disconcerting to me the first time I had somebody that tried to commit suicide. They breathed, the exhaust, and we got there and put the oxygen on them, and they got bright red. Where's Eric Barrow? There he is. Got bright red. It forced the carbon monoxide pushed it into the system, so they got bright red. I was afraid we were going to lose the guy, but it was just trying to get him back and get the oxygen in to replace the carbon monoxide. Okay. We're going to go into any questions about this? People use, there's little cans of oxygen you can buy. You can use those little pulse oximeters. And when it gets down below where you start to feel comfortable and you see that, you can breathe out and breathe in a big breath of that canned oxygen. Hold it for a little bit, breathe out, and do it again, and you'll be surprised. Your blood level oxygen will come way back up. It'll come back 8 or 10 points. It's amazing how effective those little cans of oxygen are. So next one, I think we're going to get into stress and fatigue. Go ahead.
Perform their tasks, and stress can prevent a pilot from focusing on his or her flying. Symptoms of fatigue include reduced speed and accuracy of performance, lapses of attention, delayed reactions, impaired reasoning, and decision-making, poor risk evaluation, reduced situational awareness, and low motivation to perform optional activities. It has been said that heavy fatigue is more debilitating to pilot performance than 3 alcoholic drinks. To reduce fatigue and the symptoms of fatigue, get plenty of sleep before the start of your flight. Before and during your flight, drink plenty of water. During long flights, periodically shift your position in your seat. Do isometric exercises, and if the cabin allows, get up and walk around periodically. Although caffeine in coffee and energy drinks has been proven to provide temporary alertness, be aware of the diuretic effects and possible resulting dehydration, and beware of the energy crash following a sugar high. When possible, try and take a nap. Many FBOs have crew rest areas with reclining chairs or bunks just for this purpose. Stress. Some stress is normal, such as when coping with a very demanding task such as flying an instrument approach in bad weather. Under this short-term stress, the body releases adrenaline, and your heart rate and blood pressure increase. All of this helps you to concentrate on the important task, and when the stressful task is over, your system returns to normal. However, under chronic stress, such as relationship problems, financial difficulties, or school or work problems, the stress does not go away. This long-term type of stress may place a burden on the pilots which they are unable to cope with. That causes their piloting performance to deteriorate below acceptable limits. Pilots under severe chronic stress should ground.
Excellent. Okay, so that's stress and fatigue. This is more important, and we don't give it as much attention as we should. So let's. Any questions about stress? We got the I Am Safe checklist. Everybody knows what that is, and we've got to remember it. And it's that E that can get you. Go ahead, hydration there, Frank.
Consist of up to 60% water, and we require 2 to 4 quarts of new water each day to keep our systems running properly. Our comfort zone is 68 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit with 25 to 50% relative humidity. Sun-baked ramps and the greenhouse heating of air trapped inside aircraft cockpits can run temperatures up to well over 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Cockpit avionics can push temperatures even higher. High humidity will limit the effectiveness of sweating to help cool our bodies. Studies have shown that as body temperature increases, there is an increase in error rate in motor skills, mental functioning, and short-term memory. Hot conditions also increase irritability, hostility, and frustration, increasing the instances of interpersonal friction, loss of tempers, and miscommunication. Without enough water, our physical and mental abilities decline. The first noticeable effect of dehydration is fatigue, which can be followed by sleepiness, dizziness, headache, cramps, and nausea. Drinking enough fluids is especially important when performing physical exercise and when exposed to hot temperatures. Flying at high altitudes and breathing aviation oxygen are especially dehydrating. The cockpit air at high altitudes ranges from 3 to 5% humidity, and aviation oxygen contains zero moisture to prevent water from freezing up the system at low temperatures. This means a pilot is losing moisture from their lungs and skin at a rate of 2 to 4 ounces per hour. The smart pilot makes sure he or she drinks plenty of water before flying and carries a water bottle on long flights. You often don't feel thirsty until after you approach a 1.5 quart deficit, so drink before you feel thirsty. Also, try to stay away from too much coffee, tea, caffeinated sodas, and alcohol. All of these drinks are diuretics, which cause you to urinate more than usual to flush the associated impurities from your system, and caffeine and sugar can inhibit the absorption of water. When exposed to high temperatures for long periods, or when performing exercises, it is possible to suffer heat exhaustion or heat stroke. Mild heat stroke causes loss of physical and mental abilities. Severe heat stroke can result in unconsciousness and even death. Heat stroke symptoms consist of feeling hot, often without sweating, dizziness and fainting, muscle weakness and cramps, rapid heartbeat and breathing, nausea and vomiting, confusion, disorientation, seizures, and unconsciousness. When flying during hot weather, be sure to stay properly hydrated and try to find shade and fresh air. This can be difficult in a bubble canopy aircraft, so drink plenty of water. Wear loose-fitting, light-colored clothing and a hat.
that kind of covers hydration. Illusions is going to be kind of interesting as well. Follow along. You're going to see some pretty interesting things here. And this, again, should be a review for everybody, but we like to touch on it. Go ahead, Frank.
Illusions occur when what you think you see is different from what you really
Check some of
see.
these out.
For instance,
videos.
you could confuse the lights of small boats on the water with the stars, or mistake a slanting cloud deck with the horizon. The solution for most illusions is to constant cross-check between visual and instrument references. Some other common illusions that pilots encounter are mistaking an approach to a skinny runway as being too high, or having runways that have uphill to downhill slopes, generating erroneous glide path impressions. Vision. A pilot's most important sense is vision. Understanding how your eyes work will allow you to compensate for their limitations. Light entering your eye is focused by the lens and then falls upon the retina. The retina is made up of light-sensing cells called rods and cones. Most of the cones are concentrated around the center of your vision and detect color and are responsible for a higher resolution and detailed vision. The rods, on the other hand, are located outside of the center of vision and are better at detecting movement and are very sensitive at low light levels. Each eye has a small blind spot where the optic nerve is attached to the retina. Here, there are no rods or cones. Since the nerve attaches in a slightly different place in the field of vision for each eye, the brain blends the two images together and blind spots are normally not noticeable. The blind spot can become apparent, however, when what you are looking at cannot be seen by both eyes. Empty field myopia. When looking into a hazy background or sky without prominent features, a pilot's eyes tend to relax and focus at a distance of only 10 to 30 feet away. When the eyes are focused so close, it is difficult to detect objects in the distance, such as other airplanes. To prevent this phenomenon, pilots should actively scan by shifting their gaze to different sectors and concentrating on spotting potential distant objects. By actively seeking airplanes in the distance, the eyes will maintain focused at the correct focal length. Since the eye detects motion with its peripheral vision, the search technique that works best is to concentrate momentarily on a sector of about 15 degrees in width. Stare without moving your eyes, then shift to the next sector and hold your focus there momentarily before shifting again. At each sector, look on the horizon, then above, then below, before moving to the next sector. When scanning this way, any moving target will be more obvious to the eye. Having said this, however, it is the target that stays stationary in your field of vision, the one that is not moving in relation to your flight path, that has the greatest collision potential. Night vision. When you turn out the lights at night, you can't see anything at first, but after a few minutes, you can see fairly well in the dark. Why is that? The rods of your eyes are 10,000 times more sensitive to light than your cones and are responsible for your night vision. However, they can be overwhelmed by bright lights and take up to 30 minutes to adapt to low-light environments. They also do not detect color, which is why colors are hard to see in the dark. Remember how the center of your field of vision is made up almost exclusively of cones? That means at night you have a blind spot in the middle of your view. If you are trying to pick out a small object at night, such as an airport light beacon or the strobes of a distant aircraft, you will have more success if you look slightly off-center so that the rods can pick up the target. Alcohol and drugs.
Can we stop it for a minute, Frank? Thank you. Okay, yeah, we don't need any drinks right now. So the vision I want to bring out again about empty field myopia. We've had instances at the airports in the area where somebody's on one end of the field and they're taking off and there's somebody on the other end. And you don't see them. They're down there. So there's a technique that the tow pilots use, and they showed me this. There's a building down on the end of, at the end of 1-6, to approach, or for takeoff on 3-4, there's a brown building. When we're over there in the glider area, we look at that building, and if you focus on it, it's easier to see if there's an airplane in the run-up area. Because not everybody talks on the radio and uses the same information. And Larry's going to talk a little bit about non-towered communications and some of the things that happen, because we have occasionally people not talking to one another, or they're preoccupied. And you can see better if you focus on something right next to what you're trying to see. That's what I'm trying to point out. So pick something out, a tree, an object, or whatever far out there, and then gaze over to where the run-up area would be. It's sometimes hard to see. I just want to bring that out as a potential for catching traffic that forgets to announce a departure. Somebody's got a question. Yeah. Yeah. Right. It's kind of scary when they start coming together like that. Where is that guy, you know? That's good. And there's one other thing we need to be cognizant of, and that is pilots who stare at the ADS-B looking for the traffic and they're not looking outside. What we teach is clear right, clear right, clear ahead, clear left, turning left, and now we do clear right, clear ahead, clear left. ADS-B is clear. I've noticed after playing around with ADS-B for a couple of years, and I've seen what pilots are doing, and it's interesting. They're setting up the ADS-B range for about 6 miles when they're in the valley. When you have it set for 2 miles, it's almost too late if the traffic shows up. And I was flying with somebody the other day, and he had it set at 6. I said, why? He said, well, I find that works the best for me. It's not so far away that I can't see the traffic. And then I flew with somebody else in their airplane, and he had his set at 6 miles. So if you've got a mileage ring there, you want to have it close enough you can react, but not so close that it's right on top of you. I want to mention that first vision. Okay, and I'm seeing this. Anybody else use 6 miles? Okay. Good. Sinuses. This is important because this might happen to one of your passengers. If it happens to you, you're going to know it. And there's some interesting stories, but we're going to do a little exercise. I want you to do the Valsalva maneuver in this. They're going to show you how to do it, remind you again how it works. And I want to talk to you about some things with that. So we'll touch on sinuses. My magician back there in the corner. Very lucky to have
As we
Frank.
climb and descend, the air pressure around us changes. The internal cavities behind the eardrum and the sinuses
I'm
also
already
need to
getting sick.
equalize. This keeps the internal and external pressures the same. When pressure changes are small and slow, this presents no
But
problem.
the physiology
However, when the pressure
demo in
changes
this is
rapid
really
or the
good.
ventilation passages are constricted due to a cold or sinus condition, then equalizing the internal pressure with the outside air can be difficult. Pressure on the outside of your eardrum is balanced by the inner ear air pressure. The inner ear equalizes through eustachian tubes, which travel from your inner ear to the back of your throat. When ascending to a higher altitude, the outside air pressure decreases and the higher internal pressure can easily vent out. However, when descending, the eustachian tubes tend to squeeze closed due to the higher outside pressure and do not allow the ears to easily equalize. Some people have voluntary control of the muscles that flex the eustachian tubes and can equalize the pressure with little difficulty. Others must swallow, yawn, or chew to flex the eustachian tubes. If these methods fail, you can try something called the Valsalva maneuver. Hold your nose closed with your fingers and blow through your nose gently to clear your ears. Do not blow too hard, or you could damage your eardrums.
Yeah, that's great.
These ear clearing methods must be used before discomfort is felt. It is extremely difficult to equalize your ears if a blockage has occurred and the pressure differential has become too great. If you or your passengers experience trouble
Remember
clearing
this.
your ears while descending, stop the descent and climb back up to a higher altitude until the lower pressure relieves the discomfort. You can then descend again, but this time more slowly, clearing your ears continuously to prevent another blockage. Continuing a descent with an ear blockage can result in a ruptured eardrum or burst capillaries inside the inner ear.
Very
There is
serious
no way to manually
damage can
control the venting of the sinus cavities. If you have a bad head cold or sinus condition, do not fly. Flying with blocked sinuses can result in severe pain between the eyes and the forehead, and may even result in bleeding from the sinus membranes.
So, there's also drugs called decongestants. We'll talk about this in a minute, that you can take. Sudafed is one that will decongest. Afrin nasal spray is another one. If somebody's got that, this could happen with a passenger, and with a young child, they get afraid, and they can. Usually, when they cry, that opens everything up. So there's just think about not just yourself, but your passengers with that situation. That it could be difficult. Arresting the rate of descent, going back up, and then slowing it down will usually help. Something we all don't want to talk about. I don't think this. Let's go ahead and see what that is. We're at alcohol and drugs now. I think this is the last one.
Themselves and seek professional help. Motion sickness. Motion sickness occurs when your brain feels that there is a disagreement between what is seen and what your body feels. When flying in turbulence or while performing aerobatic maneuvers, your inner ear is supplying your brain with information about movement, changing orientation, and G-forces, while your eyes may be looking at the stationary references of the surrounding cockpit. This conflict between what you feel and what you see can lead to symptoms of motion sickness like nausea, sweating, feeling hot and faint, and finally, vomiting. An individual has little control over these symptoms. In fact, some of the world's best and most famous pilots suffered motion sickness. The good news is that most pilots build a tolerance to motion sickness with experience. There are also some tricks you can use to prevent or reduce the symptoms. Focusing your gaze on the horizon will minimize the disagreement between your eyes and your inner ears. Keep plenty of fresh air flowing into the cockpit, especially against your face. Consider even opening up the windows. When detecting the onset of air sickness symptoms, stop doing what made you sick. For example, if you're doing stalls or spins or aerobatics, stop the maneuvers and fly straight and level. Try to fly when the air is smooth and cool, such as early in the morning or at altitudes above the bases of the clouds. Concentrate on the task at hand. The pilot flying is usually not the first one to get sick. His mind is busy and doesn't have the time to be confused with secondary information. Remember when you were a kid on the playground and you spun on the merry-go-round, then jumped to the ground and couldn't walk straight? The world was spinning, you were dizzy and fell over.
How many of you ever done that?
You were experiencing vertigo. What happened was the fluid in your inner ear got to spinning along with the merry-go-round. Then stop your movement, only to have the fluid in your balance sensors keep moving, giving you erroneous information. You can do this to yourself in an airplane too, especially when doing spins or by changing the orientation of your head while turning. When experiencing vertigo, you should look to the natural horizon for correct information. When that is not available, such as on a dark night or while flying in the clouds, you should look to your attitude flight instruments. After the confusing motion stops, normal sensory information will return. Illusions.
I think we're pretty well set here. Alcohol and drugs, they keep trying to come back to that. I think we're done. Yeah, there's one more. Let's do that.
Flying, at times, can be a very demanding activity. It calls for good hand-eye coordination, and even more importantly, it requires accurate perceptions and good decision-making. Substances that can dull or distort your mental and physical abilities have no place in aviation. Medical studies show that even 1 ounce of alcohol has a measurable negative short-term effect on your ability to reason and to perform complex tasks. Federal aviation regulations prohibit flying within 8 hours of consuming any alcohol. The time before flying should be extended longer if you are still under the influence after 8 hours. Regulations also prohibit flying if you're under the influence of any drugs, legal or illegal. Some over-the-counter drugs, especially those for colds and allergies, can impair your physical and mental performance. Pilots need to read the packaging carefully and consult with their aviation medical examiner before using any medication and flying. It is also important for pilots to
This is
know
a good one.
that it is not just the flight crew
Watch-
that
watch
must
this.
not fly under the influence. It is also illegal for a pilot to take a passenger flying that is drunk or suffering under the influence of drugs. A disruptive passenger can seriously compromise the safety of a flight.
Okay, that's important. And it's also important to remember that there's a federal aviation regulation about marijuana on board the airplane. Okay, it's legal in the state. For to obtain it, it's illegal, but it's not legal to carry it in the aircraft. So make sure you remember that. Let's take a break. Want to take a break for a minute, or how's everybody doing? Because we're going to touch a little bit about basic med, because we've gone through that first 4-year cycle of it, and there's questions and there's issues, and I have some points. But let's take the slides because I think it's going to cover everything we need. Frank, go ahead. We'll just, if you need to get another drink, like Ruth Ann there, she's. Take 5 minutes, yeah. So we'll get back to it here. We're going to talk a little bit about basic med and what you can do and what you can't do. We'll run through the slides real quick, but realize that if you've had FAA Medical anytime after July 14th, 2006, you can apply for basic med. Okay, so let's go ahead. Those are the things that are your most recent application for a medical certificate was not denied. I want to mention this. I had a situation, and I went and got basic med while I still had a second-class medical. I went in for the second-class medical. We had a little issue there. My medical would have cost me $1,000. They wanted me to do it, and it was just an oddball situation, cardiac situation that straightens itself up once I start working the treadmill. But you got to go do the treadmill. So I'm on basic med for those reasons. It just saves me $1,000 every 2 years, and that's enough money to rent some airplanes. So those are the things I wanted to point out to you. That just go ahead, next slide. Now, any doctor can do this. There's a total of 24 questions that you're going to answer on the questionnaire, and there's a total of 22 examination points. You know, your eyes, ears, they're going to take your pulse, all that kind of stuff. So that's the difference, is that your doctor's giving you this certificate. When you've got a FAA medical, the FAA says you're good to go. So there's some doctors that don't do basic med. They won't do that because they're afraid they can maybe get held liable, or the company they work for won't let them. But I've seen less of that recently. Most of the doctors in the area will do basic med. So just some. So there's the things you've got to do. You bring that checklist. It's all on the FAA website. It's all right there for you. Next slide. You fill that out. You keep this at home. It's your medical information. You don't carry this with you in the airplane. You don't have to keep it in your logbook. Next one. There's a free online course, and there's a couple providers. One is Mayo Clinic, another one is AOPA. And that course is an excellent course about staying healthy. It really is. It ought to be mandatory for all pilots to take that course. It's just excellent about taking care of yourself. And of course, it gets to diet and exercise and nutrition, but this is what you do. Okay? Go ahead, next slide. And this is all on the FAA website. These are questions that we cover because you have to check yourself before every flight. Now you do that with a third class or a second class or a first class. Go ahead. Now this is a limitation. No more than 6 occupants. Okay, so if you got a Cherokee 6 with 7 seats in it, you got to take one of the seats out, I guess. Mark would know. No more than 6,000 pounds. I don't fly anything that big anymore. Another slide, please. No more than 5 passengers. You can fly IFR. Can't go beyond 250 knots, and you got to fly less than 18,000 feet. So you can't fly in Class Alpha airspace. Okay? Those are and only within the United States, except you can go into the Caribbean, I believe, as well. Yep. Bahamas and Mexico right now. There we go. Thank you for adding that. We appreciate it. You have to have your driver's license, and this is a gotcha. In our organization, we check all this stuff out before you fly. And every once in a while, we catch this. The medical certificate, the doctor's examination is good for 4 years. not 48 months. So mine will come due next year on November 18th. It expires then. My driver's license expires on my birthday is in March. So they don't go together. And that's sometimes that happens. We hear somebody wants to fly and it's like, hey, you don't have a current driver's license. Oh, it expired. Or you've got the current driver's license, but your medical expires on the day 4 years after the day you took it. Go ahead, next slide. Only applies to the PIC. Yes, CFIs can use it. I'm using it. Next slide. I have no clue. 55,000. A lot. Okay, so if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. It's real simple. Mine was $105. Well, our question was, wait just a second, hold that thought. How much does it cost? Somebody asked me. So I've got to do that for the people that are at home watching. Go ahead, sir. Okay, so the question is kind of lengthy, and I'm going to try and give this to everybody that's watching at home. And read the book. Don't watch the movie. No, just kidding. He's talking about a vision requirement on second class medical that doesn't appear on basic med. And that goes back to whatever's on your driver's license. And so they're both the same 2040. That might be. So that's for far vision. So that gets into being safe for yourself and those self-generated checklists to make sure that you can do what you've got to do to meet the requirements. Basic med is for me no difference, except we do have a Turbo 206. I can't take it into Class Alpha Aerospace. That's my limitation. Go ahead. Next thing. Oh, so they're going to show you where this is, and just kind of don't try and memorize anything, but take a look. Let's go ahead and start this. I think Frank's going to take us on a journey here. Okay. Oh, Larry, you did this. This is you. Okay. So you have to take the course, and you get the doctor's certificate, and you get a basic med. You get a little card. It's just a little card like this that you carry in your wallet that says you have basic med. There it is. See, there's Larry's. Okay. So this is his medical. There's where you can go to learn more. You have to take the class every 2 years. So you get the medical exam, you do that. 2 years later, 24 months. So I had to take my class in November of last year. Go ahead. We're going to pause here.
things that are important in winter flying, starting with getting your airplane ready, getting yourself ready, pre-flight stuff, taxi operations, flight operations, and then if all else fails, I'm going to do one of my favorite subjects is aircraft survival. Next one, Frank. Frank, we got the wrong PowerPoint. The one I gave you this afternoon. Next slide. There we go. Winter flying. Guy's having a little trouble with that Cub. It's on skis though, isn't it? I don't think I'd want to do that. Oh, this guy, he thought it was really a good idea to go winter flying, right? Not so much. Winter operations. Next slide. Okay. Winter is a lot different than the summer, and there's a lot of positives to flying in winter, right? What's one of the key factors in your lift equation? Density. What kills us in the summer? Density, altitude. The air is nice and cold. Our density altitudes are not necessarily an issue. That doesn't mean you shouldn't ignore them, okay? Also, visibility in the summer or the winter can be gorgeous. We don't have the fires. We don't have a lot of the smog coming in. And a beautiful winter evening is fabulous. But if you're landing in the snow, it could be better. But when the weather goes bad, it goes really bad in the winter. So whiteouts are really an issue when you're landing. And obviously we have engine and airframe icing. And what my last little section here is on winter survival. It's a real issue if you go down in an airplane in the mountains. Okay, pre-flight planning. It is extremely important that you get your standard briefing anyway. But in the winter, remember, forecasts are not that good. My airline used to say a forecast is good for about 5 hours, and you got to expect the forecast to go down. I don't know if any of you were flying when that jet crashed out there. I was doing some instrument instruction. The forecast was totally busted with that smoke. It crashed everywhere. People are missing approaches, having to go back over. Same thing can happen when that winter weather comes in, right? You don't have an area report anymore, but you can look at those air masses and see what's happening, right? Next guy. Flight plan. Good idea, right? So everybody fly flight plan all the time? Liar, liar, pants on fire. Next one. Okay, getting your airplane ready for winter. Now, I'm lucky my annual comes in October, so I'm able to get my airplane. Obviously, I think everybody uses multi-pist oil now. Check that battery out. Now, I personally replace mine every 2 or 3 years, whether I need to or not, okay? That oil breather tube, especially during a pre-flight, if that gets plugged up, what can happen? Back pressure, and you can blow one of those seals out in your engine. They're really expensive to fix, right? What happens when the temperature gets cold to the pressure in the tires? Goes down. So make sure you got your tire pressure right. The next one, the CO detector, and Rush talked about it. And some of you may help me on this. I understand those little CO detectors are not good, that they take way too long to show up the dark color. And I know one of my students has a CO detector in one of his little ADS-B in things. So, very important. Obviously, I am safe is a really important thing because you want to make sure you're ready. And I'm a search and rescue deputy for Rush County, and first aid training is really important. I suggest everybody get first aid training. The two-day National Outdoor Leadership School is great, and we just had a whole review at our sheriff's squadron. The last one, please understand that when you're flying over the snow, out in the flat, your depth perception's not going to be good, and it's very easy to get disoriented, spatially disoriented. please go, even if you're not instrument rated. If you're instrument rated, go get current. But get that instrument and get night current. What time? On December 20th, it's going to get dark real soon, right? It's very, very easy to end up at night. So get night current. And when you put instrument currency and night currency together, what do you got? Good stuff, right? Really good stuff. Next one. Batteries. Like I said before, I change my batteries every 2 or 3 years. I just put a brand new one in. One of those Concord sealed batteries is excellent. Next one. We talked about in the previous slide, multi-vis oil is extremely important. That 100-weight oil works really good at, down in the valley at 100 degrees, but doesn't start real well, does it? Next one. Okay. This is a really important slide, okay? How much frost can be on your airplane? 0. One of my good instructors has heard a flight instructor and a light sport flight instructor tell them, one of the students, that you can take a little bit of frost on the wings. No, no, no. How important is it? And I got a recent story on this. Last Christmas time, my sweetheart was down in Phoenix, and I jumped on my American Airlines free ride, and I was sitting in the exit row seat. And I looked out on the wing at a 737. There was just a little teeny bit of frost out there. What did American Airlines do? They backed that airplane out and sprayed the heck out of it with Type 1 de-icing fluid. So all the airlines do. It's so important. Okay. And this frost can come really fast. When I retired from the airlines, I was flying a citation for these guys, and we went down to the desert, and they came back and they wanted to go to Elko, right? Cool, cold, clear night. Okay. So we landed at Elko, and they said, "Hey, I want to go to dinner." And I said, "Okay." So they waited an hour and a half later. We came back, and guess what? The wings were totally covered with frost. And they said, "Well, let's go." And I said, "No, we're not going to go. What are we going to do?" We went up to Walmart, got antifreeze, mixed it with hot water and mops, and they were mad as hell. I said, "This airplane isn't going." So we basically did a mini airline de-ice of the airplane and took off. But that's how fast. And I think Connell told me one time, one of his students, he took the airplane out of the hangar and it was warm, and wham, frost was on it in hours. Big stuff, really important stuff. Now, engine covers work, engine heaters work, wing covers, but as I said, frost forms very quickly. And a bit about de-icing, okay? I talked a little bit about how we de-ice that citation and how airlines de-ice. And I see people taking off in the snow, okay? Now, the airplane may fly just fine in the snow, but anti-ice and mostly anti-ice in airliners keeps the snow and ice off where? The leading edges, the wings, not the, leading edge of the wings, the windshield, not the flat surface. Is there one condition where airliners don't fly, Captain? Freezing rain. Airliners are grounded when there's freezing rain. Okay? All right. De-ice is really important. And our little flight school here, we have problems with, in the morning, the frost on the airplanes. One of the things we do back it into the suns, but we also use that windshield de-icer that you put in your car. And we spray that on, and then between that and the sun, we clean that wing off. We don't go flying until it's good. Never, ever, ever use hot water. Isn't that a wonderful idea? Melts it all out, goes right into all the mechanisms and freezes up. Bad stuff. Okay, next one. Route consideration. And the end of this survival thing, I'm going to give you a story, not a story, an actual event that happened. And so I'm not going to go, but you want to plan your route carefully and remember NOTAMs. How many guys have told me, "Hey, I fly down to Sacramento and I like Blue Canyon's a great airport to land." if you're on a snow machine, it's a great airport. But they don't plow it. They don't plow Dayton. So it's really important to get that pre-flight and know exactly what's happened at those runways, okay? Remember, flat snow, easy to get disoriented, okay? And you want to go, you don't want to fly into the sawtooths in the middle of the winter and just fly straight over. You probably want to fly around by Grangeville or something like that if you're going up north, okay? File a flight plan, file a flight plan. And remember that it's not just the flight plan that matters, okay? It's nice to file a flight plan, and I fly an awful lot of float planes in Alaska, and we generally don't fly a flight plan. What we do is we have our sat phones and our inReach devices, which we'll talk about, and we tell our friends. And what else do? We make position reports. When I'm flying down to Southeast, and Manny flies down there all the time, I go through Lake Clark class, I report going in to Lake Clark Pass. I report going out. I report Iliamna. Where do our search and rescue guys start looking for you? Last known position. So if they've got a position report where you are, there we start. We had one a couple of years ago up in Washoe County. The last known position was the guy's garage. He was a hunter guy. Not too good. All right. Runway conditioning monitor. What's that all about? And by the way, the airlines only require, we can't land with more than 3 inches of snow on a runway, okay? So it used to be that they would report braking actions reports in effect. And what that meant was braking action was nil or poor. So that was pretty nebulous, right? So now they've come out with this new RCAM, Runway Condition Assessment Matrix. And we'll talk about that a little bit at the end, okay? But basically, go to the next slide. It may be on there. Oh, anyway, basically, you're going to get a number from 0 to 6 that tells you how the braking action is on the runway. And I've got a slide at the end. But basically, remember, 0 means 0, okay? And I don't think you're ever going to see a 0 at a Reno airport because they'll shut the airport down. Basically, anything 3 or worse, it's going to be medium to poor braking. And you really need to be aware of that. Of course, you're not going to get that at Carson or Minden, are you? So it's up to you to make those judgments. Okay, cold weather pre-flight, cabin heating. How does a cabin heater work in a Cessna? Puts that here right over that muffler, right over the exhaust tube. Part of the manual, and I do my annual with my mechanic. You got to make sure that darn thing doesn't leak. Make sure that there's no leaks in that system because that air is coming in to keep you warm. Okay, number 2, next one. Heating. Do you want to warm that engine? Oh, yes. So your hangar just doesn't keep the frost off, but it keeps your airplane. Best thing is a heated hangar, right? How many of you guys have heated hangars? I'm not a rich guy. I don't have one. I got a hangar, but it's cold. Okay. I have an oil sump heater in my airplane. If I'm going out in the morning, I come down and I plug that in at night. And guess what else happens? Not only is the engine warm, it does heat up through, might get some of the instruments, but guess what happens to that engine when you try to start it in the morning and it's nice and warm? Easy. It starts right up, right? Right? Let's go to the next one. Okay. When should you preheat your engine? Depends on who you talk to. Continental says 20. My Koenig says 30. My mechanic says 40. All right? I like 40. If you can heat that engine, do it. A lot of these flight schools, those airplanes sit out there, and it comes up through a recent problem we have. And by the way, once you get that engine warmed up, man, you don't want to be full power in there. That's a rule of thumb. That oil pressure's got to be below 60, and the oil temperature's got to be above 100 before you start hitting full power. Those engines have steel cylinders and aluminum heads. I'm a mechanical engineer by education. You have different coefficients of expansion. When you try to hit that power before that whole thing is warmed up, you're gonna hurt your cylinders. Not a good thing. Okay. Next one. Oh, frost, we talk about that. How much frost can we have? This is for 0. Absolutely. Okay, there it is. That's the question for you YouTubers, right? To get your wings credit. It's a really hard one. Okay, next. Oh, I have a defroster. Do you think my defroster on a 182 works really well for getting rid of a frosty windshield? No. Once again, use that windshield, that de-icer stuff that's good for 30 below 0 or whatever. Okay, next one. Starting. Okay. One thing I'm going to go over, I added this recently. We've had 2 incidents with over priming 182s and fire starting. Okay. Priming an engine is has to be done carefully. What happens when you hit your primer? Where does that gas go? Goes into the induction tube just before where? Your intake valves. So, okay, I shoot the primer. Hey, I'm going to get that engine all piped up. And then I start doing other stuff. What's happening? That gas is now flowing back down into the carburetor and pooling in the carburetor. Okay? Not good stuff. So now you try to start the engine. Not only you don't have the fuel up there, but now your mixture's too lean, it's not going to start. And it might backfire. And then what happens? It starts a fire, likely down in that pooling. So really be careful. A 182 doesn't really need a lot of priming. You can use the pump the throttles, right, as you're starting, but don't pump and don't pump unless the engine's turning, because you got to remember what's happening. You're putting fuel up there, but it needs to be sucked into the cylinder. So prime and use your accelerator pump while the engine's turning. That comes from my buddy who knows more about this than I'll ever know. Okay, you start up. What's going on now? How do your brakes work on that ice? Huh? Not so well. So when you start up, make sure you're pointed in a safe direction. Okay, next one. Taxiing. Oh yeah. You want to taxi real fast? No. Next one. Okay, next. Snowbanks. I got a buddy, I fly a lot of Alaska. My buddy had his 185, and he was going fly out at Willow, and they didn't quite plow it right. Only about 10 grand to fix that wing that hit that snowbank. Next one. Wingtip, we don't have to worry about that in our 182, but do be careful of it, okay? Everything's slow and easy. All right, next one. This guy, hey, my buddy told me I could land on the lake. Really? I don't think so. I mean, it looked like a lot of fun. Next one. Okay, in motion, when you're taxiing, taxi slowly, okay? You can turn and you can stop, but don't try to do it at the same time, all right? And leave a lot of room in front of you, all right? Cowl flaps. I close my cowl. What's happened? Oops. Oh, we're going to have a flick in a minute, right? Is that right? You're bad? Write him up. He's a good guy. All right. I close my cowl flaps. You're going to need them closed anyway, probably, right? Keep that engine warm when it's 0 degrees outside, okay? Don't put the flaps down until you're ready to go, okay? Don't drag them out there. We do the same thing airlines. We put it down at the last minute sometimes when it's really, really snowy, all right? And remember, you might not just be snow, it might be slush. So you've got a retractable gear. Run that gear up and down. After you're safe out there, run that gear up and down a couple times to knock that snow out of the wheel wells. Next one. What's that, Frank? Oh, there's a video. Okay. It's going to say this. Oops, the video went.
Hello everyone, Elaine Coe reporting for AvWeb. It is 24 degrees above zero here in Wisconsin, which is pretty warm for mid-January. So today we're going to review some of the basics of safe winter ground operations. For those of you who are also out there enjoying winter, you know that there are times when you just can't get out to the runway and you're going to have to stay put. But for those days when it's doable, here are a few tips to keep in mind. Tip number 1, test your brakes before you start taxiing, and if possible, have the aircraft towed to a part of the ramp that's not quite so slick. Tip number 2, it's common sense that you're going to be taxiing a bit more slowly than you normally would, but how slowly would you go? Well, if you have to add a little bit of power around the corners, that means you're at about the right speed. Tip number 3, if you start sledding around and you feel like you're going to get in trouble, pull the mixture. You've got a chance of saving the prop and reducing the amount of damage done if you hit a snowbank. Tip number 4, if it's possible, drive out to the taxiway or runway and check the conditions out for yourself. And by the way, if you're taxiing in a low-wing aircraft, watch those corners as the snowbanks can be higher than your wings. Temperature changes can be a big problem. Even when an airport is nicely plowed, what's left over can melt on a warm day, freeze overnight, and then when you get that next snowstorm, you've got a nice slick layer beneath that powdery snow. The larger, busier airports are going to do the best job of clearing their taxiways and runways. However, when you fly elsewhere, you never know what to expect, so it's best to check ahead with airport managers on the conditions. It's also not a bad idea to check NOTAMs for reports on braking action, snow and ice. Some days it's just a matter of waiting until the snowplows come through. However, if you're in a hangar, you're going to be snowed in, and if you're on tie-down, you're going to be packed in pretty tight with all the ice. So you're just going to have to wait a few more days until it gets sunny, warm, and then you can start digging out. For more tips on winter airport operations, including takeoffs and landings, check out the January issue of Aviation Safety magazine.
All right. Okay, takeoffs. Okay. So, what happens to your crosswind component when the runway is slippery and icy? Reduced. You're darn right it is. You may have a 15-knot crosswind in your Cessna 182, but when it's icy, you may not want to try that. Remember, it's a demonstrated crosswind component. What does that mean? Average pilot can do it, right? What happens if Larry's sitting there with his book ready to write tickets and you land with a 20-knot crosswind and you taxi off the runway nicely? Larry put this book away. Now you land with a 20-knot crosswind and you go off the runway. Book comes back out. Careless and reckless operation. Serious business, this crosswind. As we know, we have huge crosswind problems here with small airplanes. And like Larry said, the number one problem here is wind, right? Okay, next one. If it starts to skid, stop. Okay? Stop. Don't keep trying to go. It's not going to get better. Okay? It's always better when you stop. Like when you're taxiing a big airliner and you think you might come close to somebody, what do? You stop. Let him hit you. You don't want to hit him, right? All right, next one. Tactical gear, we talked about this. Next one. Recycle the gear. Good stuff, right? Next one. Structural icing. Once again, as I talked about, airline, big airplanes, de-icing, flight into known ice that doesn't cover the top of the wings. Okay, that's the key. You got to get those clean before you go, right? But how do we? I think the guy last time we did this, it was a United guy. He said they tested the wing temperature on the 747. It was 140 degrees with the wing heated up. So that'll definitely keep the ice off the wing. But we don't have that little airplane. And by the way, I know some of you guys may have these airplanes that are certified for a flight in known icing condition. It's certified to get out of icing condition, in my opinion. And even airlines, we don't sit there. That icing layer is what, 4,000 or 5,000 feet thick, 3,000 or 4,000 feet thick. What's our anti-ice? 3,000 feet a minute rate of climb, right up above it, right? Okay, next guy. Okay, expect whiteout conditions when you're landing. When you're landing in a snowstorm at night, do you have your landing lights on? No, you don't want them on, and you want the runway lights to be down. You'll get blinded by that snow, right? Also, I have my PO heat on all the time in the winter. That's exactly what I know it's on the checklist to do, but I turn it on and turn it up. You go on in the summer, you burn the darn thing up, right? Okay. Whiteout conditions, when it's snowing, you start to flare, you're going to lose it. Okay. So one of Rick's favorite things teaching flying, always stay on the VASI if you have one. If you got vertical guidance, stay there. There is no reason. I challenge you to give me a reason why you should land on the end of the runway. There is no reason. Takeoff distances are always longer than landing distances, right? And we talked about crosswind component. Next one. Okay, this is that RCAN deal that we talked about, 0 to 6, right? 0 to 6, 0 means zero braking, 6 is dry pavement. You're going to get that at Reno, you're going to get that at Sacramento, but you're not going to get it at Minden or Carson. So you have to make your own decision. I've gone out there and walked on the runway to see what it was like, right? And I do have a funny story about it. I've done a lot of winter flying in the airlines. One time, we were going into Omaha in the middle of the night, blizzard, right? And we're only allowed 3 inches of snow, and they were reporting 3 inches of snow. Shut an ILS right down the minimum. And so the guy was saying, hey, let's try those max auto brakes, because the MD-80 has minimum, medium, and max auto brakes. So, well, this is the time. This is the time of blizzard. So we did max auto brakes. Came in, I greased the airplane on. We start to turn off, and I go, John, that's the guard ramp. We had stopped so quickly because the snow actually helped, right? The snow actually helped. Fortunately, nobody knew except you guys. We just were able to turn that airplane around and get back into the ramp like nothing happened. So I guess the point of the slipperiness is here is snow may not be the worst case. The worst case is probably water over top of ice. Okay? Bad stuff. Yes, sir. That's what happens when Frank's your airport operation manager. I didn't know that. Oh, for YouTube people, Frank says that Minden does generate, that's computer generated, but they'll generate the RCAM numbers. So that's really nice stuff. Sir. Yeah, that's a good point. I have wheel pants. It gives me 10 knots, man. I like my 10. Oh, I'm sorry. You said a lot of back east people do not have wheel pants on because snow and ice can get up into the wheel pants and stop your wheels from turning. Next one. Okay, this is leftover from the last presentation, and I just put it up here. There used to be, for an instrument, there used to be a little snowflake. That meant that you had to do a cold weather, an altitude adjustment on feeder routes. So I called up NorCal and I said, "What do you think?" He says, "I never heard of it, and I wouldn't know what to do." But I noticed all the snowflakes are gone now, and most people that I have T5s in mine, and those are temperature compensated altimeters. I don't know if not any guys are flying instruments, but those snowflakes are gone. And I think it's because air traffic control says we can't do that because I'm flying with an altimeter setting. I'm supposed to fly 300 feet higher because the temperature's cold because my altimeter's wrong. So I think it's gone away. Okay, next one. Oh yeah, isn't that nice? Just a nice picture. Next one. Greater vigilance, greater pilot proficiencies. Prepare the airplane, prepare yourself, right? And be very vigilant in your flight plan. And one of my favorites one is, what's your FAA fuel requirement for day VFR? 30 minutes. You have a nice day, because mine is an hour and a half, okay? Because I fly a lot up in Montana. We fly a lot in Alaska, always extra fuel. In the winter, particularly in the winter when the forecast can go down, there's nothing like fuel in the tanks to make you feel good. Make you feel good. It's good stuff, okay? Next one. We all know this one, right? And this isn't the reason for this presentation, but one of my favorites, one of Larry's favorites is don't ever get cocky in an airplane. Don't ever think you're the best pilot. I'm going on 15,000. I got a lot to learn. Manny's got 30,000. Manny's got a lot to learn. Don't ever get cocky in an airplane. Don't ever think you're the world's best pilot. I learn every single day I teach flying. I learn from private students, everybody else. So, different subject. Okay. Survival. One of my favorite subjects. I used to teach this in the Marine Corps. I lived in the jungles of Vietnam and the infantry for a year, so I know lots of different kinds of survival. Okay. All right. Depends on three things, right? Mental strength is really important. Preparation, be ready, equipment, third. All important, right? All right, next one. Positive people do a lot better chance in survival situations. If you read some of the survival books, thinking about your family. Guys, I'm going to die, but I got to get home, take care of my kids. That's important stuff, okay? And you got to be able to adapt to the circumstances. Next one. Okay, so the old 3 and 3 and 3, right? You can go 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. Really? You can't go 3 days without water in the desert. And you can't go 3 hours in a blizzard going down on an airplane in the mountains. You're not going to make it. Believe me, you're not going to make it. Next one. Okay. What I said, general rules. Now you watch these survival shows on TV. What are they doing? Eating worms. I got to do this. Survival situation in the airplane is probably a 3-day deal. It should be, particularly if you do some of the things we're going to talk about here, right? Food is generally not a problem. Okay. Next one. Most, like I said, 3 to 4 days, right? Now, most deaths in the winter, what are we talking about? Hypothermia, right? Hypothermia is what's going to get you, right? So, well, the first thing about staying warm is staying dry. Thermal water transmits heat to and from 25 times faster than air. So if you keep dry, you got a good start, right? Next one. We got 2 basic crash survivals, right? I fly a lot in Alaska, even in my airplane here. I'm ready to go if I get out of the airplane, right? The other one, and more important one, is you got to be ready to get out of the airplane in a hurry. It's on fire. It's going down the cliff. So what are you going to have? You're going to have what's on you or immediately available. You're not going to go back to get your tent and your sleeping bag, which is in the back, right? Okay. Next one. Okay. Back again. This is back on the mental things. And I'm a military guy, I'm an airline guy, and the training that you get when you train for something, when it happens, you don't panic because you're ready for it, you've seen it. Important issue, you might want to think about that when you're out there winter flying, right? Next one. I talked about this before, making position reports where we start looking for you. And that last thing, carry a satellite communicator personally. How many of you guys have an inReach SE? I see a lot of smart people. I don't know anybody in Alaska that flies without an inReach SE, which is a personal communicator. Right? It costs you $12 a month, and maybe $500. And I don't go anywhere. I do a lot of backcountry skiing. I hike a lot. I always carry with me. It goes to their satellites, and you can text back and forth. That's the best part. A personal locator beacon like that one right there, which I also have. That's an older version. I got a new one. That's 911, right? You push that, it goes to the COPAS, SARSAT satellites. It goes right to the search and rescue guys, and they come get your butt. But suppose you go down and everything's fine. You got your tent, you got your food. They'll text you and you say, hey, I'm okay. Don't send that helicopter out in the snowstorm. I'm okay. So I'm just a real believer in these inReach SE. Garmin has them. There's some other versions. Spot runs off the Global Star satellite, which is not as good in my opinion. So if there's anything you want to carry, do that. As far as signaling, okay, I use the same thing I use in the infantry in Vietnam. I have a strobe light and I use marine smokes. Those are the best signaling. Yeah, a single mirror works, but strobes and smokes work really, really well. Okay, next one. Okay, this is back to if the airplane's intact, you got all this stuff in the back, right? You got a little food, you got water, you got snowshoes. Notice none of this has got basic survival stuff, right? None of it. Next one. If you got to get out in a hurry, okay? I can't emphasize this proper dress. Don't go flying with your sneakers and your Levi's and your sweatshirt and think you're ready to go down in the mountains, because you're not. And shoes are so important. My sweetheart, when we go flying up to Montana in the summer, she said, oh, I'm going to wear my flip-flops. No, you're going to wear your hiking boots. And when we go out in the winter, she's going to wear her pack boots. Because if you get out of an airplane, dress right with the coat, which we're going to talk about in a second, you're going to be in good shape. Also, I strongly recommend day VFR every flight. Knife on your belt, half serrated blade, so you cut yourself out of that seat belt if you need it. Plus, it works it's a #1 survival tool. I had a friend of mine. I wasn't there. I was there the day after. My friend's got a cabin out in Skilak Lake, and this cub flipped out. Cub on floats, flipped. There were like 10 people. There were boats. They got in the boats to get out. The thing started sinking. They finally got a rope on it. He couldn't get out of the seatbelt. He could not get out of the seatbelt. Now, there's some seatbelt cutters, but I like the knife because that's a good thing to have in a survival situation, right? Okay, next one. How do you dress? What about the survival code? Okay? Everybody, and I do a lot of backcountry skiing. Layers important. I got a little fleece top and my Gore-Tex top. What happens when you stop? When you're hurt? You want a warm, puffy coat, right? That's mine. One of mine. I have several of them. That's Gore-Tex. That has Primaloft insulation, right? And I have either on me or right next to me. I told Manny this. I was up a number of years ago. I was up in Alaska on January 1st. This buddy of mine at 185 in a hangar on skis. And he says, "Let's fly out to Post Lake." 50 degrees below zero. I had my bunny boots on, my Gore-Tex pants, my fleece, my huge parka. I was ready to go if I got to get out of that airplane, right? Next one. Test it. Test your fire starter. You think it's easy to start a fire in the snow, in the cold? Try it sometime. You're going to be shocked. And you think your coat's warm? I take mine to Minden-Tahoe. If I got a new coat, I sit out in the back for an hour and see how warm it stays. Because you'd be really surprised how cold it gets. Next one. All right. After the crash, what are you going to do? Get away from the airplane. Assess the situation. Treat and stabilize serious injuries. Okay? We all have a good first aid kit in our airplane, right? How many of you have Israeli battle bandages with you in your airplane? If you don't, get one. They're compressing bandages. You can stop bleeding in a hurry. We actually did very similar things in the infantry in Vietnam. Activate that satellite communicator and try to start a fire. Get out of the wind, right? Here's a test question for you. At 33 degrees and 50-mile-an-hour winds, you'll hear it say, what will you hear people say? Wind chill factor. Will water freeze at 33 degrees and 50-mile-an-hour winds? It's only the convective heat transfer. That's as if you were in still air and it was 50 of 30 below zero. That's how fast. But you're not going to, the temperature's not going to go, you're not going to freeze water until you're below freezing, right? Stay busy, stay happy. Keep your cool. Next one. Okay, we're almost done here. So this is an accident that happened. And this guy wrote a book about it. His name was Brian Brown. He's a firefighter. He lives down in Wilton or in the Sacramento area. Wait a minute. This is a winter flying thing, right? May 2012. I've skied in Gore-Tex and Pile in June in Tahoe. So it could easily be winter. In fact, this guy wrote a book. I bought the book and I read it. And you know where Amazon has these comments? And I said, I teach this stuff and I use your book as an example of everything to do wrong. And the guy actually wrote me back. He says, I know you're right. But he was on the TV shows and anything. So what happened? So he's flying from, I think it was Lodi or Wilton down the valley. It's a nice day. Beautiful day. His wife gets in the airplane in her flip-flops, right? No survival equipment at all. No warm clothes. And they're going to Minden-Tahoe, which is where? Over in Idaho, right? There's no mountains between them. So he takes off, right? And put the next slide up. He takes off, and the weather's starting to come down a little bit, right? So he lands in Susanville. Gets gas, good thing, right? Well, I think I'm not going to go. Well, now the weather's looking really good. Off he goes again. Have you ever been to Rome Airport? What's at Rome? A VOR and a gravel runway, right? He sees the weather coming down. He's probably got his little, foreflight or something. He sees it coming down, right? And he lands, and it starts to rain. And now it starts getting dark, and it's cold. And he's got his wife and his daughter in a plane. He's thinking, it's cold, it's raining. So I'm going to go right straight over to Minden-Tahoe Airport, which is right near Minden-Tahoe Air Force Base, right? Look at that route. Those are the Oahe Mountains right there. I go all the time up to Montana. Look at this. Could come right up here, right down here, flat. But no, he goes right across the Oahe Mountains. And guess what happens? The weather gets worse and gets worse. And he goes down, he's flying bad weather into the mountains. And he ends up stalling the airplane. And next picture, that one and the next one's even better. Okay, they all happen to live. What happened was his daughter had a cell phone. And he didn't know what to do. I mean, he's a firefighter. He's supposed to know all his EMT, but everybody's hurt, not too badly. And they didn't know what to do. And his daughter's cell phone rings. And the rest of this book is how great the search and rescue guys, because once they got the cell phone ping, they knew where they were. And there's a long story about the helicopters getting out. And he was on TV. His wife never totally recovered, but she was injured. But they lucked out. And the point of this is, any of the things we just talked about would have prevented you from getting in that situation. You would not have done that. The guy was obviously foolish. I was surprised he answered back when I wrote that review on Amazon. Okay, I've had enough. You guys had enough? Anybody have any questions? Inspector? Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Rick. Yeah, just want to thank you guys all for coming tonight. And there's just one other subject I want to touch on briefly. And I get a lot of phone calls throughout the days and sometimes on the weekends. And these phone calls focus mainly about poor communications by pilots at the Minden Airport. And poor communications add to a greater risk of accidents, mid-air collisions, runway incursions, and so forth. And so I want to just invite all of you and all those who are on the YouTube that fly out of the Minden Carson Airport as well to be more vigilant about your communications. And if you need to, there's several online courses through FAASafety.gov that you can go to refresh your mind on the proper communications of operating at a non-tired airport. You know, instead of showing you a video here, I just want to mention that to you and ask for your cooperation in that area. And I'd like to see those phone calls start dropping off a little bit because I get a lot of them. And really, other than that, I want to thank you again for coming. I want to thank Russ and Rick for their help tonight, and Frank especially for the technical assistance that he's done, and also the fact that he's moving up in the airport out there, and he well deserved, and a pleasure to work with the past couple of years out there at the Minden Airport. There's changes coming about, growth. There's probably going to be a lot more flying this winter than there was last winter, so keep that in mind, and be safe and respect each other when you're out there in the aircraft. Thank you very much.